Howdy.
Howdy.
Folks, thanks for joining us this afternoon. For those of you I haven't met, my name is Mark Welch, and I am privileged to be the Dean of the Bush School of Government and Public Service here at A&M, and have the opportunity to work with some of the folks who are going to speak with you tonight, which is really the privilege of the job. But I wanted to just say welcome to the Annenberg Presidential Conference Center, to the Bush School, and to the Bush Center area. Over in this part of campus, we have the Bush School, which is the only official part of Texas A&M over here. We have the Georgia Barber Bush Foundation, which is headquartered upstairs in this building, which oversees all of the Bush family entities like Points of Light, Literacy Foundation, etc. And then, of course, the Presidential Library across the way here. And those collectively are known as the Bush Center. And we like to do things together whenever we can, just because there's a lot of great things that we can do over here and share with the rest of campus and the rest of the community. We have people here from across the campus. We have students from the Bush School and faculty members from the Bush School. We have members of other colleges from the university, and we have some community members who joined us here today as well. I'd like to introduce two people real quickly up front. The first is Professor Will Brown. Will is the director of our Center for Nonprofits and Philanthropy here at the Bush School and our host for the evening. Will, would you raise your hand? Shy tonight, but normally incredibly charming. And then Will's deputy in the center, one of our professors of practice at the Bush School, a longtime public servant and nonprofit organization leader, Dr. Kenny Taylor, who I'll bring to the microphone in just a second. Kenny's hiding behind one of his creations, by the way, because he made all of these. Amazing guy. Kenny Taylor. He's been denied, but I happen to know he also made his jacket. Really done many, many times. Starting in May of 2020, through about May of 2021, most of us on this campus and across our country had a lot of really difficult conversations, really critically important conversations. And one of the things we found here at the Bush School is that we started those conversations from a place where we all agreed to stand, as opposed to from a place of our differences. Those conversations went much better. And we found that we had a whole lot of common ground between us, no matter how we sounded when we opened our mouths or what we looked like when we walked into a room. No matter what our social background or educational background, there was an awful lot of common ground between us, and we all cared about the same things. So if we started the conversation with every person, every Aggie, every Bush School student, faculty, or staff member is deserving of respect. If we start from a position of everybody's family matters, everybody's future is important, every child should grow up with the same opportunity to excel based on their efforts, every community should be striving to move forward constantly, because we're in the job of producing public servants here who serve all of their fellow citizens. If we started there, the conversations actually were pretty darn good. And one of the great things about Black History Month is it gives us a chance to do something that's really, really, really important, and that's to not let those conversations end. It's a chance to learn about other cultures, to learn about your own culture in some cases, a chance to share understanding of everything from why things happen to what drives people, what motivates them to succeed, and maybe most importantly, what motivates people and communities to come together in service across any line you can draw. And that's what tonight's about. We have a remarkable speaker who's demonstrated that his entire life. And we have a great person to introduce him who I mentioned before, but is just a role model for all of us at the Bush School, Dr. Kenny Taylor.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you to Dean Welch. Members of our Student Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee are here. Thank you so much for your contributions in making the event happen tonight. The Bush School's Office of Diversity and Career Services, and we have representatives from the TAMU Office of Fraternity and Sorority Life. Thank you all so much for being here tonight and for your support of this event. I'll try to be brief. We're here to celebrate the Black fraternity and sorority contributions to public service. As a member of Omega Psi fraternity myself, in just 2 weeks from today, I'll celebrate 30 years in my organization. If I were to be honest, early on, when I pledged in 1992, I couldn't say that I honestly saw the connection to service. But as we sit here today, it's extremely relevant that it's easy to see in the likes of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity. My fraternity brother, Governor Douglas Wilder, the first black governor in the state of Virginia. And our Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, who's a member of AKA, Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Closer to home, though it's obvious, those of you all in the room that are members of the Divine Nine, would you please just kind of raise your hand real quick for us? Again, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you and all of the contributions that you make to Texas A&M University, the community here in the Brazos Valley, and also anywhere else that you serve as a board member, the volunteer efforts around the school here. We thank you and salute you for your service to our community and here to Aggieland. I won't speak on the quilts too much, but yes, I am the artist. I learned from my mother. I'm happy to visit with you about the meaning, but basically it's a representation of my love for Divine Nine, my organization, and just how much my organization really means. Just real quick, I guess I should say that, in many ways I look at the lessons that I learned back in the day and how that contributed to the person that I am today and where I am today was extremely meaningful in my life. The friendships that I still carry those 30 years ago, even to this day. That said, it's an honor to have Dr. Walter Kimbrough here as our guest, who currently serves as the 7th president of Dillard University over in New Orleans, and before that, as the 12th president of Philander Smith College in Arkansas, in Little Rock. 3 years ago, when we started this event, I said to myself, if there was one person that should really be here, that I hope to have, he's really the one that is the expert, the scholar about Black Greeks and a whole bunch of other stuff. So it's a real honor to have you here. Thank you for traveling in. And as a side note, whenever I said Dr. Walter Kimbrough was going to be here, I joked with him a little earlier. Everybody just said, I love him. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Walter Kimbrough.
This is the only place in the world where I get to say what I'm about to say. Happy. I learned this years ago. I was on this campus, I was on the Memorial Union. People just walking by me saying, Hattie. I was like, what did they say? And it's not, you can't say howdy, you gotta say Hattie. So I'm just excited to be here to practice my Hattie for at least a little bit today. So I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation to be here. It let some of y'all sit, but this is the home of the 12th man, so I know y'all stand all the time. All right, let me jump right into the presentation and talk a little bit about public service and historic Black fraternities and sororities. So let's go back to the advent of African Americans in higher education. There isn't an agreed upon first in this case. John Chavis, and I just saw a clip of something that Henry Louis Gates did talking about Chavis being the first, but they're not really sure if he graduated. But they mentioned him 1799 or so. Other people might mention graduates from 1823 or John Rushmore Brown from 1826. So we don't really know, okay? But at some time in that period of time, you have your first African Americans entering college. You get your first HBCU 1837 at Cheyney University, Pennsylvania, okay? This is important because now you start to have a critical mass of African Americans who can really enter higher education. But even the earliest higher education for African Americans, HBCUs, was really dominated by the leadership and the faculty being whites. So a lot of institutions like Benedict College in South Carolina, the first X number of presidents, I think, maybe 12 or 13, were white presidents. And so this was something that happened. And so you have those presidents, a lot of focus on the religious training and those kinds of things. And so a lot of the student out-of-class activities related to that. So being involved in YWCA or the early Kirk Franklin in the family, you know, y'all know Kirk Franklin. Okay? So the choir, those are things that you can be involved in, ministerial union. So that was really the out-of-class experience really focused a lot on those kind of opportunities. So once you get a critical mass, and students are realizing that on some campuses, there's a creation of secret societies, fraternal organizations, 1776, the founding of Phi Beta Kappa, the College of William and Mary. 1812, you start to get up to the first Kappa Alpha order, which is different from, there was just Kappa Alpha Society, which is different from the modern day Kappa Alpha order. And you start to see this growth. But then students of color on these campuses said, we could have Greek blood organizations too. The first attempt was 1903, Alpha Kappa knew at Indiana University. It lasted for about 14 months. And it sort of died out. There are just different conspiracy theories. I have a friend who's a member of Kappa Alpha Psi and said they heard that some of the members got lynched. So you think about Southern Indiana, at that point in time, it was very problematic for African Americans. But this is the place where in 1911, Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity was founded. And the name was in reference to the men who started Alpha Kappa in 1903. But once again, very short-lived organization. 1904 in Philadelphia, you had college graduates that created a fraternal organization because they had seen them on campuses, and they created something known as Sigma Pi Phi, also known as the Boule. The Boule still exists today, made up of prominent men in different communities, college graduates, a number of members of Black Greek blood organizations as well. But founded in 1904, they actually had 2 undergraduates that they admitted early on. Both of them died. I don't know how or anything. After that, they didn't do any more undergraduates as part of their organization, but still exists today. Okay? So it's known as the Boule Sigma Pi Phi. And you can sort of see, this is in Washington, D.C. These are members of the Boule, and they include Ernest C. Just, who was one of the founders, who was a professor at Howard University, one of the founders of Omega Psi Phi. And down, he's on the second row on the end is Carter G. Woodson, Black History Month, Negro History Week, also a member of Omega Psi Phi, but also part of the Boule as well. Okay? So we don't really get into the Black fraternal experience in earnest until 1906 at Cornell University with Alpha Phi Alpha. And between 1906 and 1922, you get 8 of these organizations that are founded for years, so they're known as the Great 8, that really were the bedrock of the Black fraternal movement in the United States. So that sets it up now. You've got more students involved. It's bigger than just the religious organizations. They could do different things. But it's still a lot of gender-specific activities. So, ladies, if you were at a school, Black college in the early 1920s, the home ec, the dressmaking department, those would be the kind of activities that were really for you. A lot of the men were still involved in the sports activities as well. But you start to see some other opportunities in terms of literary societies, performing, dramatic societies, are also other ways that people got involved. But this is still fledgling now, going into the 1920s, and people are hearing more about these fraternities and sororities and they want to be a part of them. So they start to expand on, this is from Tuskegee University, and use some of the same names. When we think about IFC and the Fraternity Council today, we think about, predominantly white men's fraternities for the most part, but people use the same language at that point in time, okay? But there was a very different mindset in terms of what it meant to be in these organizations and the responsibility. This is from the yearbook of Johnson C. Smith in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I want you to see how one of the members of Kappa Alpha Psi talked about what the fraternity was about, okay? No fraternity group can achieve its purpose unless its members measure up to the ideals of the organization. Scholarship should be the first measure of the candidate. Scholarship, okay? We start with that. In line with this, the members should be expected to live up to certain social standards that would be in keeping with the ideals and standards. So you hear a lot, ideals, standards. Your chapter should be a measure of your fraternity. So these ideas were set early on in terms of what these groups would be about. And in fact, in 1977, McMahon did a dissertation, and it was for all kinds of fraternities. He went through and looked at rituals and their manuals, and he said there are basically these 5 ritualistic concepts that make up Greek life. And I argue today with people, I think you will find these today in all groups. So if you think about their rituals, and those of you who are members, you think about rituals and all their hymns and all that, you're going to hear terms that relate to character, okay? Scholarship, as I said, the first Greek blood organization, Phi Beta Kappa. We think today the epitome of academic excellence. Fellowship, we talk a lot about brotherhood and sisterhood, so that makes a lot.
service, which we'll get into, okay, to less fortune, to a profession. And then people don't think about this, but religion can be about a part of it as well too. My mother's a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, so that becomes part of a lot of the conversation within Delta Sigma Theta as one example, okay? So these sort of 5 pillars of what Greek life should be about. And if you look at just the models of the Divine Nine groups, those concepts, just in the model, are very much a part of it. Okay, it's very evident as part of these organizations. Okay, so we're going into the 1940s. Y'all with me? Okay, all right, 1940s. So now more and more people are hearing about these groups, and particularly in the South, as HBCUs in the South become accredited, people want to have their own organizations too. So on some campuses like Tuskegee, they just start off and they have social organizations. And some of the names of the social organizations might be a little surprising to you. Okay? This is at FISC, the Swastika Club. Now, a lot of times when you hear swastika, we think Nazi Germany, but the German swastika actually rotates the other way. This is also known as the Gammadian cross, the Greek letter gamma. The Gammadian cross, or crux gammata, sometimes also referred to as the footprints or the feet of Buddha. So they had a deeper understanding as to what swastika meant in terms of forming their organization. Okay? Students at the HBCU, 1920s, 1930s, with that kind of worldview. Okay? They didn't have Google, they still had that kind of worldview. Okay? But most of them, use traditional trappings of Greek life and use those Greek letters, and they were local fraternities and sororities. Okay, so they use the letters. You can start to see the influence. This is at Tuskegee before they got fraternities and sororities. Delta Sigma. Y'all know they ain't just make it up out the blue. Okay, somebody just like one day they gonna have Deltas on the campus. We're gonna have Theta on the end, and we in there. Okay, so we set it up. My favorite is this one. It doesn't matter which one. Just pick one you want to be in. Okay. It's the power of those groups at this time. This 1940s, that people just saw a power to say, I want to be a part of this. There's something magical that's happening, and I want to be a part of one of these groups. And so when they came on those campuses, now in the South of HBCUs in the 1940s, it was a big deal. It was all in the yearbooks and the student newspaper. People were really excited about these groups, okay? And also during this time, 1930s and 40s, you can really get a sense as to how much these ideas of service and education were now building up in these groups. Fort Valley State University, this is from the archives at Fort Valley State, part of their student newspaper, 1946. And I like to look at, a lot of groups, they have a week of activities. We call them a week, okay? The weeks are very different today than they were then, because you saw a lot of the focus on educational type programs, okay? So some of the Greek programs they had that spring of 1946, the life of Carver and talent shows and program for graduating seniors. Delta Sigma Theta has had May Week, I think, since 1930. As a part of, you see the activities for May Week. Look at the role of fraternities and sororities in the post-World War. Okay? Those are the kind of, so we're having these conversations so that the members will be educated about the issues, so they're able to do the service, but they had to know the issues first. So it's, 1946, these are college students having these kind of programs. The undergraduate chapter of Omega Psi Phi, newly established on the campus, wound up a series of Greek letter programs for the spring season with the presentation of the Journey Through Literature. Okay? That's what the Omegas did during their week at Fort Valley. Phi Beta Sigma, they had educators from Morris Brown College in Atlanta, cooperation and collective uplift. The president of the college, how to rid ourselves of this economic dilemma. Negro business improvement, okay? They're setting the foundation. These are things that we need to know about. Johnson C. Smith around the same time, this is 1927, they talked about Achievement Week. And remember I talked about George Washington Carver G. Woodson, National Negro Education Week, which is now Black History Month. It was right in line with Omega Psi Phi, mid-1920s, the same kinds of things. To understand this, but they're saying now that the week is over, this literature will be cast into waste baskets, and congregations and students will forget about it. They're really trying to push to say, we need to study this all year long. So you got to understand there's this influence by Carter G. Woodson as a part of the work that Omega Psi Phi was doing, even on college campuses. This is interesting when you start thinking about the political capital of these groups.
This is in 1926. Members, the national president, the Grand Pomar of Kappa Alpha Psi, other members are at the White House with Calvin Coolidge in 1926. Okay? So this is an organization that's 15 years old. And I was reading something, there was, a debate on Twitter about something that the GOP put out about, great presidents, and Coolidge was on there. People didn't think Coolidge really should have been on there because I think there were issues just in terms of the economy. But Coolidge was very progressive on issues of race. And this is an example of that. Because it will be a long time before I show you another picture like this. Okay? This is 1926 at the White House. So it's just one of those, to me, to understand, like, how did these guys have that kind of political capital as a 15-year-old organization in the 1920s to be at the White House? Okay? That's a very, very powerful image. You start to see these chapters mobilized, working in the community with Boys Club. They'll just have a bookmobile to distribute books. Those are the kinds of things that were happening. But we really start to see the power of these groups with the civil rights movement. So you go into the 1960s, my hometown of Atlanta, like all across the South, and you have civil rights events that are happening and protests. And there was a lot of organizing on campus. The Atlanta University Center, this is actually from the Morris Brown College yearbook where my dad went to school. And sometimes there's a debate in terms of were the members really involved, and if they were involved, how visible were they? This young man has the sweater on with the 3 stripes. There's a dark stripe, and the light stripe is probably black and gold because it looks like my dad's sweater. The members of the groups were very involved in the organizing and the activities as a part of the civil rights movement. And so when you start then to think about it, when we break it down and we start thinking about who led the civil rights movement, they were the members of these groups, okay? Hosea Williams, Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King, Ralph David Abernathy. Phi Beta Sigma, Omega Psi Phi, Alpha Phi Alpha, Kappa Alpha Psi. Okay? It's 4 of the biggest names of civil rights, and they're all members of these groups. So when you really start looking at people who were involved in the civil rights movement, it's almost impossible not to mention somebody who's a member of one of these groups. It's a very powerful legacy of these groups. And when you think about it even today, people being involved in this is outside the courthouse where they're advocating for the family of Ahmaud Arbery, and they had pastors who were there. I'm going to come back to Martin King III in Sharpton. Jamal Harrison Bryant, pastor of New Birth Baptist Church in Atlanta, Kappa Alpha Psi. Ben Crump, who Al Sharpton calls Black America's Attorney General, Omega Psi Phi. Okay? Or civil rights leaders that met at the White House with President Biden. Melvin Campbell, Delta Sigma Theta. Former Mayor Martin Morial, President of Urban League, Alpha Phi Alpha. In the back of the glass is Janetta Cole, former president of Spelman College, president of the National Council of Negro Women for a while. She just retired, Delta Sigma Theta. We'll come back to the other two. Now, why am I coming back to some? To show you the power of these groups. Because you have people who have long left college who still want to affiliate with these groups and accept membership. Al Sharpton becomes a member of Phi Beta Sigma in 2009. His civil rights credentials are already, branded by me. But he accepts membership then. Some of the new members for Alpha Phi Alpha later on. Joseph Lowry, who founded Southern Christian Leadership Conference with Martin Luther King in New Orleans, Louisiana, joined Alpha Phi Alpha in his 90s. Okay? Along with Martin King III, Reverend C.T. Vivian, who's the third there, Robert Franklin, who was president of Morehouse College. The power of these groups. 2019, Sherilyn Eiffel, president, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, member Delta Sigma Theta now. That's the other difference with these kind of groups, that people who are very well established, they don't need these credentials. Still want to be a part of these organizations. Okay? So, back to the 1960s, we get our 9th member of the Divine Nine, Alpha Phi Theta, founded at Morgan State University. And these are 12 non-traditional students. Some were veterans. They brought a different kind of flair to the Black fraternal movement coming in the 1960s. The 1960s was also a time we started to see integration of Southern universities. I graduated from the University of Georgia that was integrated by court order in 1961 by Hamilton Holmes and Charlene Hunter Golf. Charlene Hunter Golf, member of Delta Sigma Theta. Hamilton Holmes, member of Alpha Phi Alpha. Even in integration, the members of these groups were very much a part of it. So, 60s, 70s, there was a lot of growth. The 1980s, when I was a student in college, now you get popular culture paying attention to black fraternities and sororities. School Days, controversial at the time, because out of 1988, I was a junior in college. Have y'all seen School Days? Okay, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. I had a student when I was that older than me and said, that's a classic. I like, that ain't no classic. The Raising the Sun is a classic. But it is, though, it's a very important film. It's a very important film. And around the same time then, a different world, where you had a lot of students, even on my campus, that said, I wanted to go to an HBCU because of a different world. It was just one of those cultural events that lasted 4 or 5 seasons, where you had this fictional HBCU, and they had fraternity sorority life that was prominent as a part of that as well. So now you get a lot of coverage. People are paying attention. Every magazine does an article in 1983. They do another article later, talk about sorority growth. People understand, they're like, wait a minute, they're historically black groups, but they've always had a diversity of members. And people didn't know that until the 80s and the 90s. And now you start to see stories that about the diversity within these organizations. Million Man March happens, and Louis Farrakhan is partnering with Phi Beta Sigma. You see him as a part of that. That was a big cultural moment, the Million Man March, and that happened in the 1990s. Stepping and step shows, people start to pay attention to, because you have the movies and those kind of things. And now, you know, this was right before the Olympics in Atlanta. And so people were talking about it because that was a part of the opening ceremony, if I'm correct. And then Lawrence Ross writes Divine Nine. So this is the first major book that talks about black fraternity sororities. I think it comes out in 1999. Okay? So now people are really interested. Who are these organizations? Who are the people? They're coming of age, even though now they're almost 100 years old. And people are paying attention. And like I said, more popular culture. Stomp the Yard is like 2 verses of Stomp the Yard. Drumline has some fraternal elements as well as a part of that. Okay? So it takes us into the Centennial era, which is where we are now. So we're in a period of time where all of these groups are celebrating 100 years of membership. And I was always concerned to say, okay, so what are we going to do? Because at this period of time, when people think about our groups, they mostly think about stepping and hazing. My side job is that I'm an expert witness in hazing cases. So that's another story in and of itself. But we're seeing this period of time where there's a lot of attention to the groups because they're celebrating 100 years. The last of that first 8 will happen this summer. Sigma Gamma Rho will celebrate their 100. So we're in the middle of this centennial era, and I was always thinking, like, what are we going to do now? We're 100 years old. How do we make an impression about on the things that are happening? And things started to happen in the country, which forced us to say, how do we become relevant? Okay? 2012, Trayvon Martin, 2 years later, Mike Brown. And so now we're trying to figure out how do we address these issues. The pandemic happens, and then George Floyd. But we start to see now our members are starting to pop back up in ways that would have been reminiscent of the 1960s. And this was new for us too, because we had gotten so out of the habit of being involved in the front lines. There were some debates to say, okay, people are going to jail and get arrested. Should people wear their leathers? Okay, this is a debate, and it was really, some of it was gendered in terms of the conversation, because I think there was more pushback in terms of the women saying, should women be arrested wearing leathers? I'm always like, yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, wear your leathers and be arrested, because I think that's to be more authentic to who we are and what we should be about. Okay? But at the same kind of new messaging with the fraternities, like I said, I showed the pictures from the 60s, and they're wearing those elaborate sweaters and now protesting. So those are part of it. But people are having those conversations, and it gave us a new opportunity for people to write different kinds of stories to link our history to what's going on right now. And it was an opportunity for us to lean in. And you start to see more of us now leaning in, wearing leathers, protesting. which I think is very powerful to say, yes, we're out there, we're not separate from what's going on in our communities. Which some people say, you know, these are the bourgeoisie, they don't really care about what's happening with the little folks in the streets. We were out there in the streets and you saw a lot of that going on. And so we started creating new programs in to address some of the issues. Out of Phi Theta created a program that really tried to address some of the police challenges that were going on. So they created new programs as a part of that. And so when you think about it today, and it has been for a number of years, when you start thinking about the legislative process, and of course John Lewis is a major civil rights hero, our members are very involved in it, historically, okay? So when you start thinking about persons, members of Congress, a lot of the black men who are members of Congress are members of these groups, okay? Marcia Fudge, who is now over HUD, past National President of Delta Sigma Theta, but when she was a member of Congress, you see the number of members of Delta Sigma Theta, members of Congress. One of them might be a senator from Florida, depending on what happens with Val Demings there, okay? And so these are activities then that have been increasing in the last few years. You know, these days on Capitol Hill, days at the Hill in different states. I was at a Delta Days in Louisiana, at the Louisiana State Capitol. And it was, man, so many Deltas, you couldn't even move around. I was like, I'm about to go. They just got everything, like, you couldn't get in no meetings. They were there every committee meeting. I was like, oh, I'm going home. There's too many of y'all here, okay? But everybody there is going to have to reckon with, that was the kind of action that we're seeing, okay? You see, all these women being involved in the legislative process is a part of how we think about how to actualize these groups. And this becomes part of the narrative when you hear a lot in the news, particularly for black women, and the power that black women are having as a part of the election process. People are taking note of this. So when Loretta Lynch, remember Delta Sigma Theta is going up for Attorney General, you got all these Deltas out there looking at folks like, don't do nothing wrong. Okay? They're flexing their political muscle, their voting power in new kind of ways. And so, once again, 1926, you got members of Kappa Alpha Psi with Calvin Coolidge. You don't see many pictures like that. I can't find one like that until Barack Obama with members of Delta Sigma Theta. At the time, Cynthia Butler McIntyre was the national president. I mention her not only because she's my friend, but she's a graduate of Dillard University. So I had to give her an extra shout out since she wasn't around long. But you see next to her is Gwen Boyd, who was another past president of Delta Sigma Theta, and then two down, Alexis Herman, former secretary with the Clinton administration. And then on this side, you can see Marcia Fudge again, who was in Congress, but now HUD. We're silent for a while, but now we're back, literally, at the seat of power. Members of our organizations having these kind of conversations. And then the game changed again to a whole nother level. Because now you get one of the members that is nominated to be the vice president of the United States. And I'm married to an AKA. Man, it's been insufferable. Living with an AKA. And the president, the vice president, is a member. It was like when they had the inauguration, I think I heard Ski Week everywhere, all of it, just like, it was in my head, like, do I hear it right now? It's just, okay? But the news paid attention to this too, okay? In terms of the power of black fraternities and sororities, particularly sororities. And people are mentioning the Divine Nine in a lot of different articles now about these groups. So here we are again, this is very recent. Vice president with the presidents of all Divine Nine organizations. All nine, with the Vice President of the United States, who is also a member of one of the groups. Yes, the opportunity for these groups in terms of public service and making things happen has never been higher. The level of visibility has never been higher. So these are exciting kinds of conversations. Glenda Glover is the national president of Alpha Kappa Alpha. She's also president of Tennessee State. We'll talk about her in a minute because I had to get some additional information for this presentation, so I just texted her. So I'm going to tell you what she told me. Okay. So this is very powerful imagery that now people are seeing in these groups. Okay. The political influence of black sororities. It's not just the power of black women in the political process, but now even black sororities. Okay. And so while there's still a lot of focus on, I talk about, hazing and stepping and strolling, we've even taken that to a different level. Because someone got an idea in my hometown of Atlanta, and they said, we're going to do stroll to the polls. We're going to galvanize folks to go vote. Okay? And so this image becomes viral. And people are trying to figure out, the historical legacy of souls to the polls. You get out of church and you go vote. Well, now these black fraternities and sororities saying, we're going to stroll to the polls and get people interested that way. Okay? So this is Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They're stroll to the polls in there. Dallas, Texas. The guys try to get in. There's one of these flyers around on this. Okay? But everybody's getting in on this. A new way to think about strolling. I like this a lot. Okay? And so now you have these trusted partners in a very difficult age that are finding different ways to serve. Okay? We're still in this pandemic era, so now you need these trusted partners to help get people to get vaccinated, to get tested. So you saw lots of partnerships like this all across the country. This is some for South Carolina. All across the country, people are trying to figure out how do we partner with these groups. Montgomery, Alabama. These are big events that we're doing. Okay? Still, historic programs in terms of providing scholarship money. That's very important, something that we do. Where Alpha Phi Theta, where they were founded, started an endowed scholarship at Morgan State University. But the AKA's killing everybody with this. Because the national president is an HBCU president. And so her target, number one, is about HBCUs. And she's like, we're just going to raise an insane amount of money every year and give it to HBCUs. And the first year she did it, they did $1.6 million. She's only president for 4 years. So I texted her, I'm like, Dr. Glover, what's the total right now? There are about 103 HBCUs. They have given money to 96 of them. Anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000. That means Historical Black Sorority has given over $5 million to HBCUs in the last 4 years. AKA has a permanent seat on the UNCF Board of Directors because they always give UNCF a check that has $100,000, $200,000. I was telling everybody who ran for president, Alpha Phi Alpha, if you don't have nothing like that, I ain't voting for you. Because they're killing it right now. That's what you're supposed to be doing. So, I'm just a big fan of the work that they're doing. But this has been her for, I need to find some AKA. We need to change our bylaws. I need her to stay 4 more years. Because I like getting the money from AKA, okay? But this legacy of service now is at a different level of visibility. It's something that we can really be excited about. So traditional programs, they still exist, working in communities, grassroots, but the political and social activism for these groups now is at a different level as well. And it's something that I really get excited about, that we can have these kinds of conversations about these groups from a historical point and see where they are now and the kinds of opportunities that they're providing in their communities. So with that, I'll take a few questions. Anybody? Y'all ain't got to be shy. I'll turn it back over. Okay, yes.
Howdy, my name is Shantae Hurst. I serve as the interim director for Fraternity and Sorority Life here at Texas A&M, and I have the pleasure of having some of my advisors here as well as some of my outstanding students. My question for you, as university president, who's very, very knowledgeable about this community in particular, what do you see being the current charge for these collegiate students, especially coming out of the pandemic, where they may have had significant impact to their ability to build their membership and do programs the way they would like to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's going to have to be some focus on how do we build the membership, because there is great interest. I think the interest is not going down; it's probably increased some. So I think the interest is at a good level. It's now making sure that they have a protest in New Orleans that summer, and she's like, I gotta go. My son is 13, so that means it was 2 years ago. So 13 and 11. He was a little afraid because he's thinking, uh-oh, if something bad happens, they're gonna give me a dad. Okay? So we were telling like, Benjamin, no, it's okay, we all gonna go, all four of us gonna go to this. But she had a sign, she wanted to be out there. So there is a generation of students who are coming to colleges with a different level of social mind. They want the fraternity, sorority, the fun stuff too, but I think we're at a point where we can get people who have a little bit more civic consciousness to join and give them a space to be engaged. And I think that would be attractive to a lot of people. I think we need to lean into some of that. So I think it's an opportunity because I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. And the last few years have sort of given us, shown us a way for us to be involved, and people have looked for us to lead, even on the college campus. Because there's still a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of issues happening in higher education that our group should be involved in, okay? I mean, once again, Texas is a great ground for a lot of this stuff. Can't teach critical race theory like no one is anyway, but sure let people go run the ball on the football field. I mean, what if somebody got to all the athletes here and said, no, if you do that, we leave. I promise you, it will work as it happened at the University of Missouri in 2015. When the black students felt like they weren't being treated fairly, and the football team, and I'm a hardcore SEC guy, I went to Georgia. Missouri don't even belong in the SEC, and they weren't even a good football team. And they threatened not to play, and they got the president of the system fired and the chancellor at the University of Missouri. You tell me those black players aren't out on that field for Texas A&M, things gonna change. They say, you pass those laws, you see what happens. And they'll shut it down. Who's gonna organize that? Who's gonna have that spirit of those civil rights people I showed you on that back balcony to do something? It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity. That's a good question. I think I'm gonna need escort to get up out of this stage tonight. Sneak out. The impact will come with me. Anybody else? I'll be around for a while too, because it's always somebody like after like, I ain't want to ask everybody up. I need to ask you a question. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Daisy Green. I'm a member of the Civil Data Sorority Incorporated, the Omaha Mesa chapter. What recommendations or tips do you have for getting other councils to respect our causes, understand our organizations more, and kind of respect us as more than just being their piece of diversity that they need to get their things going?
Yeah, no, that's been an issue a lot of times, particularly when I started my career as coordinator with Black and Emory. So I know that world well. And a lot of times when people say, we're gonna have Greek week, and y'all come and it's planned, and then you just sort of pop in and teach us how to stroll. Y'all gotta say no to that. It's like, no, let's have a serious conversation on something that's going on. Let's work on a certain project and demand those kinds of things happen. If they don't want to do that, then that's cool. It's like, y'all going to do that, ain't no hard feelings, but these are the kinds of things that are important to us that we want to be engaged in. And it's not, I always feel like people shouldn't do the strolling and the fun stuff. It's like, well, let's deal with something substantive. What can we deal with substantive and have those kind of conversations? But you have to dictate that. And you just have to say, no, we're not here to perform. We want to do something substantive. So I think you set and like I said, that's not what people want to do. That's fine. There's no hard feelings. You're just like, we really want to deal with some issues. There are issues that we could be dealing with on this campus and have conversations that make this campus a better place. And so we want to have those kind of conversations. I mean, somebody should be having a conversation with your now world famous basketball coach. You know what I'm saying? I mean, she's world famous. If I was younger and single, I'd have a holiday. But those are kind of why is there so much judgment about what this woman is wearing? What does that mean? Who's all involved? How do you even have that within the community? I'm sure there's black women who look at her a certain way. Respectability politics, and how does respectability politics limit what people are able to do? There are a lot of complex conversations that can be had about that to sort of figure out how does that impact you as a black woman and what you want to do, and what those experiences are like. What did she learn from that? What can other women learn from her? What can men learn from her in terms of that?
commented on that?
Those are the kind of conversations I think you can have. I think you got to dig into those opportunities. So yeah, it's like we got to do performative stuff. That stuff is tired. It was tired when I was working in Greek life in the 90s. Don't do that anymore. Just like, look, we want to deal with some real issues that are happening. And we're not just going to come and show up and teach everybody how to stroll. And everybody like, we got a great Greek week because y'all can't even stroll. Y'all not here to perform. Okay? All right, you're welcome. All right,
One more.
yeah, okay.
Oh, it's just been in the news recently about bomb threats at HBCUs. Wondering if you've ever personally experienced anything like that, or conversations that you've had with other institutions who are going through that currently, and maybe some historical perspective there.
Yeah, this has been crazy. I've actually done a number of panels, and Dillard has not had a threat. There have been threats historically, even for Dillard, going back to, Straight University, which is one of our predecessor institutions. One of the main buildings got burned down when it was first built. So that's just a part of the terror that has existed with these organizations. I always tell people the goal of this is not to actually bomb something, because people who bomb stuff, they just go bomb stuff. They don't do all these elaborate threats. They just start bombing. The goal is to disrupt, and that has been the plan. And so I think people have been unnerved by it, and I think I'm hearing a lot from my colleagues to say, this is just what we got to deal with. You got to understand that, everybody who thought that the civil rights movement ended in the 60s has lost their mind. This is a reminder, it ain't over. It ain't over. You get a different kind of backlash now. So how do we deal with that? Actually, I got an email today. There's another call with the FBI, I think tomorrow at like 1 or 2, that I'll listen in on. And I think really they're going to have to make some arrests and make them visible, so people would be like, all right, stop playing. We just haven't had that, so people are still, there was some last week. It's no rhyme or reason. So I don't know, I think people are dealing with it the best they can. There have been a lot of support from the President's administration, FBI, Homeland Security. I've been on a couple calls with them already. So they're providing support, but I know it's just disruptive for people where they just say, all right, everybody just go online today and it will come back tomorrow. The goal is to be disruptive. So there needs to be some high profile arrests, and then people realize like they can't catch you, because they're basically just using the technology to offer these threats. And there has been, in all of the threats, there has been no evidence of anything that's tangible to show that they even had a plan, let alone a device. So it's all just calling in, hey, there's a bomb on your campus, I'm gonna come shoot up everybody. It's on that level. And so there's been nothing substantive, but that's not their goal. Their goal is just to be disruptive. So it's been interesting. And so even for those of us who haven't, we had to have a meeting, look at our protocols, send out to campus. If we get a threat, this is what we're going to do. So our students are still thinking about it, because we've had a school, Xavier, in across town from us. They've got 2 or 3. So it's like our students are paying attention, because it's like, well, that could be us. We don't, and then Southern up the road, they have one too. So it's unnerving even if it's not you. It's unnerving, but I think people still are in good spirits. And like I said, they gotta arrest somebody at some point, because if you don't, people feel like I can just use the technology and hide. There's no way for them to stop. They need to know that they can be caught, even using the sophisticated technology that they're using to hide. Okay. All right, y'all. I appreciate being here. I always enjoy being on this campus with so much tradition and culture. So I'm glad to have been here with y'all tonight. I hope you got some different perspectives about Black fraternities and sororities, particularly in the aspect of public service and social justice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kimbrough, for that presentation. I can't think of a more appropriate venue to talk about the legacy of service than the Bush School of Public Service. First of all, it's good to see everyone back here face to face. It's been a while since we've been able to do this. And just look at these beautiful quilts. Aren't they just amazing? And I think everybody knows where they came from, right?
Right.
Everybody knows where they came from. Kenny, you just such an artist, such an artist. But if I could just make one comment, every time I see a quilt, I think about a story that I always tell in all my presentations on diversity. The last slide that I show is a picture of a quilt. And I tell everyone in the audience that my grandmother lived to be 106 years old. growing up in Alexandria, Louisiana, right up the road from New Orleans. And I remember as a little kid seeing my grandmother pull out this, I guess it was a pillowcase. And she would sit down in a rocking chair and she'd sit there and she'd rock and she'd sing hymns and everything. And she'd reach down in this little pillowcase and pull out a rag. That rag may have been an old t-shirt, may have been an old sweatshirt or old pair of pants, whatever. It may have been round, it may have been square, it might have been rectangle or whatever. And she'd pick that rag up and she'd sit in a rocking chair and she'd sing and she'd start sewing. You know, I tell everyone that as a kid growing up, to me that was a pillowcase full of rags. But to her, every little piece that she touched, every little piece that she sewed together was precious. It's almost as that she had to have that odd little piece of rag. And she would sit there and, as I said, she would sing hymns. But 6, 7 months down the road, all those rags became this beautiful quilt, like the ones that we see here. You know, all these started as small pieces of cloth. And I tell everyone in my presentations that you and I are just like those small pieces of cloth. We're different. If you look around, we're very different. But just like those pieces of cloth, each one of us is precious. And when we all get together, when we all work together, just like those pieces of cloth, we become something beautiful. So whenever you see all of these beautiful quilts around this room, don't ever forget that. Because guys, that's what diversity is. That's what diversity is. Diversity